Good evening, everyone. It's the Activated One, New Bright 10, the Futuritarian, Peace, and Jasa. So, yeah, dealing with these gangsters, with these gangster movies. The agenda that's being pushed, that's been pushed since really since the 70s, but it got real pushed in the 80s, and then it got super pushed in the 90s. But when you're dealing with these movies, and now with the internet out, there's not going to be no more excuses. Because you notice that these rappers, this is the mainstream rappers and the independent rappers that's still talking about guns, violence, killing their own brother over some emotional domestic dispute, something that has to deal with money, their lady, or just blunt disrespect. So, with the internet out now, there's not going to be no more excuses on why you chose that path, the path of savagery, of being a savage. So one of the main excuses on why these, especially the conscious celebrity rappers, the first thing they're gonna say is, "We was just rapping about what was going on in the neighborhood." No, you was rapping about what was going on in the neighborhood and being selective of what you chose of what was going on in the neighborhood, because you was mentally programmed by the television or by the radio, the deflection of the raw frequency. That's what that really is. So when these rappers come on here and they get interviewed, and you always wonder why they say that, because that's their only crutch that they have. Is that's what I'm just telling this. I'm telling a story of what was going on in the neighborhood, but you was being selective because everybody likes to choose and pick their battles on the situation that they're dealing with in the present at hand. Because you might have you know had a sister. Say, I'm just going to give you an example, right? You 18 years old, you in the hood, you're a gangbanger, or you're a thug, and then you have other things that's being put in the forefront in the hood that you're not rapping about. I'm gonna give you an example. Okay, you're 18 years old. You might have a crush on your neighbor 3 houses down. She might be 17, 18, 19, but you see her every day getting up, putting her outfit on, going to work, going to school. A couple of years later, you see her. She's in college for business. Then she opens up her own salon. She ends up being a woman that knew how to deflect what the beast been pushing on the radio and the TV. So that was in your neighborhood also. You know what else was in your neighborhood also? Why you want to use that as a justification on why you rap that way? Even your parents. Some of these so-called thugs and gangbangers had both of their parents in their family. I knew one personally that had, he didn't have his father, but his mother she was in the real estate. She was in the real estate. She lived in a nice big house um, off of Summit. If you're from Minnesota or St. Paul or Minneapolis, you know Summit. That's where the governor's mansion is at. So a lot of those houses over there were real big. There were older houses, but they were houses that you knew um, the mortgage was high, and also um, dealing with the purchasing a house, the value was also high. And even back in the day when I had saw that brother, and he was a gangbanger, and he chose to gangbang, and now to this day he is addicted to mind altering drugs. But this is the point that I'm making. See, with the internet out, you have a choice. So that's why they always want to push something and always want to have a victim stance, like they're a victim. Yeah, to somewhat you're a victim of mind manipulation, but then you also have a choice to rap about something else. See, they don't never rap about their mom and their father, the ones that went to work, put food on the table. Might have been going to school for um, to be a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer. But see, they don't put that in their raps when they also saw that in the neighborhood. And you can't tell me that you didn't. There was always that one saying where they said a flower grows out the concrete. There was always a couple of flowers in these neighborhoods, and you saw them, and you took heed to what the beast was pushing. So when these niggas and the beast put you to death, and you chose to be a gangbanger, or you chose to be a thug, or you chose to be promoting that lifestyle, and then you get a bullet in your head, why would people have sympathy for you? And one of the reasons why they have sympathy is because maybe you was famous on the internet. Maybe they had an emotional bond with you through the ethernet. But that's why all this stuff is just being pushed. So when these rappers, conscious, gangbangers, and celebrity rappers, that's the only crutch that they have. Is we was rapping about what was going on in the neighborhood. No, you was being selective. You were selecting, picking your battles on what you wanted to rap about in the neighborhood. Excuse me. And even when you're looking at some of these so-called black gang movies, gangster movies, you always see somebody in there that's doing something to try to help move the community forward, but then they still choose to gangbang. But they don't rap about that. You know why? Because they got the mark of the beast on them. The intel that's being sent, they have the deflection genetic in their brain, in the electricity, in their neurotransmitters. The deflection. Now, if you look at the word gangster and break the word gangster down, see, I'm through breaking words down. Because everything in life is not, scratch that. I'm just going to get straight to the point. Now, when you're looking at the Italian mafia and the mafia in general, I'm just using the Italian mafia as an example. The one reason why they thrived and got to the position where they got to is because, for one, when they was a gangster, they was real quote unquote gangsters. They didn't, one thing they didn't do, they didn't teach their kids that. They didn't show their kids how to be a gangster. I'm talking about the ages between 5 to 13. 5 to 13. Well, really, my fault. Really, it's 3 to 13. Because it's 10 years, everything's on a quantum level, the 1 and the 0. 3 to 13. You don't see them. They hid everything from their family for a reason, because why was they doing that? They were thinking about the future. That's why I tell y'all, man, it's always going to be about the future. It's never about the past. Why do you think the so-called black race ain't in power right now is going through what they go through? Because they're worried about the ancestors. They're always going back, oh, in 1968 and in 1959 and, oh, Black Wall Street, and they're always going backwards. They ain't going to get it. The so-called black race is not going to get it. To be focused on the ascendants. Who was the ancestors receiving intel from? The ancestors were receiving intel from the ascendants. So you can't focus on nothing that's dead and you think that stuff is going to be different. It's not. It's always been futuristic. It's always been about the future. So then when you're dealing with the mafia, the real gangsters, they kept everything from their children. They wasn't riding around with their 4-year-old son sitting in the back seat selling dope to a crackhead. But these are the people that you look up to. If you want to be a thug and you want to be a gangster, that's who your God is. Al Capone, Scarface, Denzel Washington on American Gangster. That's who your God is. So when you get sacrificed in these streets and one of your own kind or mankind puts a bullet inside you, why are people being emotional about that? And don't even have a personal attachment to that person. You know why? It's because they got the mark of the beast on them too. The television, the frequencies that's being projected out into the mainstream media, into these mainstream movie theaters, and through the digital sound, the sound and sight wave. And some people that are around me, they go, they get. See, one reason why we came back on the planet, we were reincarnated, is to show certain people that's in the black race, you got to stop being emotional on stuff that has nothing to do with you. You move forward, you keep it pushing. It's just that simple. So when these rappers get gunned down in the streets, and then you listen to their songs and what they was rapping about, I'm thinking to myself, like, that was one of the options that could happen to you. You already know if you're going to be a thug, a gangster rapper, what do they say? Oh, you got to live that life. Live that life. Okay. Live that life and what? Teach your children to live that life too? Because the mob, they was living that life for real, but they wasn't bringing that stuff home to their house. They wasn't showing their children how to do that lifestyle. So like I said, when they get gunned down by the police or they get gunned down by, one of their peers or one of somebody that looks like them or somebody that holds some of their same genetics, it is what it is. And it is what it's not to some extent. The gangster mentality has been pushed for a long time now. And they always want to use the victim stance of, I'm telling the stories that was in the hood, but you don't never, like I said before, you don't never tell that story of the lady across the street. You see her with her scrubs on. She's taking a bus, going to school to be a nurse inside the slums. So that excuse is going is now that excuse of saying that is in the forefront now. You can't just use that excuse because there was always somebody in the neighborhood that was trying to do something to uplift the people. But you know what you chose? You chose what the beast was pushing. You know why? Because you have a weak mind. Your mind is weak. You've been cut off. Because who's your God? Your God is mankind. You know who your God is? All four of these pictures on this, all four of these actors that's on this picture, that's who your God is. So when you get shot, stabbed, filled with holes, and you're laying on that concrete and you're looking up and your heart pressure starts to slowly decrease and your vision starts to get blurry. And then the people that are above you looking at you start to fade away into darkness. And you was promoting the gangbanger, the thug mentality. That was the judgment. Judged your mental. There is no more excuses. It's the activated one, New Brighton, the Futuritarian, Peace, Jasa.